Morning. We are on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Beis. Oh, sorry, we don't have copies of the Gemara. Page 112b, and the Gemara continues with advice for life given by sages to their children, to their students. And some of the advices we'll see, we already saw their practical implication in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Some of the advice that was given. Each of the sets of advice, at least a lot of them, are going to bring us to a little sidetrack to give full picture to it, as we've done in the past, like, don't sit in Arami in bed, right? The Gemara gives 3 different interpretations. So we're going to have a similar kind of thing going on here. What's interesting is that the next 2 sets of advice are both going to be given to Rabbi, but by different sages. Rabbi as in the compiler of the Mishnah. Now, yes, and I'm complete total assumption and conjecture, but Rabbi Yehuda, being the compiler of the Mishnah, was kind of a student of a lot of teachers, right? You had Rabbi Akiva, who had his 5 big students who learned from him, right? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda, by Eloi, the other Rabbi Yehuda. And those 5 students become like the big speakers in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda compiling from them, right? Because they're
right.
That's the chain of Torah learning of the Messiah, the tradition. So Rebbe, I just a complete conjecture. I guess like the previous generation looked at him as like, this is our future. So like they would like confer to him their life advice. Maybe. Just conjecture. Just because of the fact that 2 different sages are both giving Rebbe advice, and they're both being recorded.
So he was a contemporary of those?
A little younger, I guess, but
yeah.
When you say next generation, you mean, doesn't mean they were born after the other one died, but that they were like overlapped, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't learn from each other, right?
Unless he just took from their notes.
He did. But I still think it was a bit dumber because his father, Rabbi Gamliel, actually maybe he was a contemporary because his father, Rabbi Gamliel, would have been Nasi at the same time Rabbi Kiva was doing all this teaching. Rabbi Gamliel the Yavna, as he's known.
Young.
1 second, no, is Gamliel Shimon then Yehuda? No, it's Gamliel then Yehuda. Right? Hillel, Gamliel, Shimon, Gamliel, Yehuda.
That would be a great class to just organize all these people.
Just from this generation. Yeah, so we did the broad strokes in the history of Halacha. But zoom into specifically the Mishnaic era. That might be interesting. Actually, you know what? That's a nice idea. Just to go from from Zugos till through the Gemara. Who are the big characters throughout the generation? Nice, so it's
blow up
just for that section. Yeah. Just for the Mishnah and Gemara.
That puts us in a nice framework.
Especially for those learning Gemara and Mishnah often.
Well, yeah.
That on a regular basis, which we all should be.
Yeah.
We all are, thank God.
We are.
Then that would be nice. Yeah, maybe, you know what? That's a nice idea. Maybe that'll be next. Maybe that'll be next. Just zooming into that time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Very good. Okay. So the line begins with the word Yada, Mistaken, and it's Gimel Dvarim. About 3/4 on top of the page, yeah. Gimel Dvarim. The following 3 things: Tziva Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. S Rabbi. Rabbi
lines?
Wider lines. So not the wide lines. The last your frame looks a little different than mine because you have 2 widest lines.
I think I found mine.
Yeah.
How does it start?
Gimel Dvarim, Tziva Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi, so S Rabbi. There's a parenthesis after it which says Makash.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
So before that. So there are 3 items that Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, commanded Rabbi. Makash, Simon. Makash would be your mnemonic because there's 3 items. The first starts with Mem, the second starts with Kuf, the third starts with Shin. So if you wanted to memorize it, then you would do Makash. Right? This is not uncommon. Right? They don't have printed word.
Right.
They barely have a written word, that being expensive, both pen, ink, and paper specifically. Expensive for them all, and the paper.
You're recording?
Yeah. So if you want to memorize it, commit it to memory, you would write Makash, why you want to ask something?
No, I was just,
Okay.
I didn't really. Good.
Okay, so first item, mem. Al tas mum ba'atzmacha. Do not give yourself a blemish. So the Gemara, yeah. So the Gemara, this now is that was in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh. Now the Gemara is about to switch to Aramaic, so I know it's the Talmudic, the Gemara, the Amoraic Gemara era, analyzing what they heard about Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yossi, speaking to Rabbi Yehuda, to Rabbi. So, Mahi, what is the meaning of this? Don't give yourself a blemish. Right? We should not assume that he means literally don't hit yourself. First of all, that's just an obvious piece of information. Don't hurt yourself. But moreover, actually, as we learned, it's halachically forbidden. One is not allowed to damage one's property or oneself, God forbid. So that's what he means. Don't give yourself a blemish. There's got to be something more extrapolative. Good morning, Alan.
Subtle.
Something more subtle that he is telling us. So says the Gemara, Magi, what's the meaning of this? Says the Gemara, like you have a dina bahadli tlasa. Don't get into a legal dispute or legal involvement with three people. Why? Because if they have three people, if three people are like your counterparts in a business dealing or in a some sort of litigation, you run into an issue where they can conspire against you. Namely, Tachad haba baldinach. One will be your official defendant, other litigant, right? Following?
Your primary adversary.
Your primary adversary. For today and the other two, Saadi will be witness against you. So if you follow that?
Well, you're saying don't inflict harm to yourself, and this is saying.
What does it mean? Don't inflict harm to yourself. It means don't get into a litigation question against three people, because they will conspire. One person will be your official litigant, and the other two will be the witnesses, behaving as if they're not litigants, when in reality you know that they are.
Right.
So don't set yourself up in a position where you're bound to lose. So
halakhically, you're doomed. I mean,
there's nothing. That's right. So you haven't done anything halakhically wrong by getting into business with three different people, or three people. But you're setting yourself up to lose, because they can easily conspire against you.
Right.
Unless you have two other people on your side as well.
And they have
It's getting complex already. Now you're adding more cooks to the pot.
No.
But yes, so that's the point he's making. Okay, so that's how the Gemara interprets the statement, don't give yourself a blemish, which if you want to go more broadly, the Gemara is saying when you're entering into business with others, it's somewhat, it's borderline cynical, but it's also practical, especially when you're talking about business, that you have to play out in your head, if your adversary was the worst kind of person, what would he do? And anticipate that. So assuming that your opponents, your legal opponents, don't care lying, what would they do? And in this scenario, two of them would become witnesses against you. Well, one person's playing litigant when in reality all three are litigants. All right, so you want to go more broadly. Don't damage yourself, as if to say, don't be so trusting of everybody. Oh, the nice guys, that's okay. No, think of what would your adversaries legally. How far, if they wanted to go down the route of being untruthful, how far would they go and avoid that?
Trying to make a foreseeability of the
That's right.
Worst case scenario.
Exactly. And that's how you have to plan legally. Don't plan legally assuming that everybody on the other side is going to be honest. That's not how it rolls.
I think it even mentioned in the Torah somewhere. I don't know if it's Parkei Avot. It says just broadly, you shouldn't take partners in business. I mean, that's probably.
We had that once before.
Probably a lot of.
We had that here in the Gemara. We had
this
this one before over here, right?
I don't remember from where I heard it, but
we had something similar here about not having.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of exceptions to that.
Right.
That was the general.
Oh, we had don't take rich people as your partners. No, you should have the rich people as your partners.
Period.
Yeah.
No qualifier there, but.
Right. Okay, so that was advice number one. That was the mem of makash mum. Don't give yourself a blemish. Oh. Advice number two, val tamed ala mekach. Don't stand by a vendor when you don't have money.
Huh.
Act as if you're buying.
Wow.
And then the salesperson's busy selling you, but you don't even have any cash on you. You don't have your credit card with you. You have no intention of buying anyway. You're just bored and you're just giving false hope. Yeah. And in the meantime, you're making him lose a sale because he could have sold someone else, but he thinks
time with you.
that's right. He thinks you're buying.
Right.
So it's dishonest. So it's funny. On the one hand, he says, assume that your partners are going to be dishonest. Right? That was the first piece of advice. Assume that your litigants are going to be dishonest, and therefore don't have three because two of them are going to conspire. They're going to conspire against you.
Right.
So assume that the other people are not honest, but you yourself be so honest that you don't even ask about a product if you don't plan on buying.
Yeah.
So it's like a flip side of it.
The standard of
Window shop. Don't waste people's time.
standard of conduct.
Yeah, also making him lose business because he's selling you when he could be selling someone else.
Right.
Right. And you don't even have any intention of buying. So
Right.
assume that other people are dishonest, but you go to extremes to be honest.
Right.
It's almost how the
Right.
sages behave. They always demanded more of themselves. And
That's exactly right.
others.
That's right.
Even
Assume.
though they didn't follow
That's right.
the halacha that they were giving to others, they were more strict.
That's correct. There we go. Now, finally, halacha number 3. You have to wait for the qualifier because if you don't wait for the qualifier, this could be something that would be opposite to your experience. Namely, Ishtecha Tavla, your wife went to mikvah, Altiz Zakikla, don't engage with her physically, Laila Rishona that night when she comes back from mikvah. What? Wait for the qualifier. Amar Rav, so that what do you mean? Because it's as we know it today, that's the mitzvah. When your wife comes home from mikvah, the mitzvah is to be with her. And here he says, when she comes back from mikvah, don't be with her. What does that mean? So Amar Rav explains. Ubenida dairaisa. We are speaking specifically of when she is biblically not a nida anymore. So let's explain.
7 days.
No, let's explain.
No.
Halacha, in biblically speaking, there are 2 types of blood that a woman would produce that would prevent one from being with their wife. One is called nida, one is called zava.
Oh.
They are 2 separate things. Yeah. Now, the halacha of nida is, right, that 7 days after the flow starts, she goes to mikvah, and then you could be together. Even if the flow continued all the way through to day 7. In other words, after biblical nida, you don't have to have 7 clean days.
Mm-hmm.
After biblical zava, you have to have 7 clean days. Now, the women, the Jewish women have taken it upon themselves to treat all blood like a zava. So no matter what type of blood they've seen, it's always 7 clean days. That's how we observe it. Okay? But biblically speaking, there are 2 separate types. There's a machlokes between Rambam and others, exactly how you delineate between zava and nida, and when you treat nida and when you treat zava. But we're going to leave that alone for now, because it's not relevant halachically speaking today, because we treat all of it like a zava. So what we call nida is actually really zava, because we treat all blood as zava, and therefore we always wait 7 clean days. Whereas biblically speaking, if it's a nida blood, we're not going to get into how you know if it's a nida blood or zava blood. But if it's a nida blood, then you don't have to wait for 7 clean days. You just 7 days after she first saw the first emission, that's when she can go to mikvah. Even if that morning she saw blood. Right. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, and this is why Rabbi Yishmael ben Yossi is telling Rabbi not to be with her that night, because Hoyel considering because she was bleeding all the way till this morning. So we can assume that Mayan, the source of the flow, like the Mayan is literally a spring.
Yeah.
Right? Like the well. The well is open. The flow is going. Dilma mashcha ziva. So perhaps the fact that you engage with her intimately will actually stimulate the opening, keep it going, and then she'll become a zava. And you will have turned her into a zava. So even though technically speaking, biblically speaking, you're allowed to go be with her tonight, because it's a nida, right? And therefore you can be with her now. Nonetheless, Rabbi Yossi is saying, don't be with her that night because you're likely to trigger more flow, and that will turn her into a zava, and now you run into a problem of waiting till she stops bleeding, and then 7 clean days. So wait 1 day, let her opening close, and then engage with her. So again, this advice does not apply to us today because we anyways wait 7 clean days after any blood. Okay.
But are they mutually exclusive, or they're always linked?
Nida and zava?
Yeah.
No, they go by different times in her cycle. So during certain times it's nida, and during certain times it's zava, and the switch is actually at the 7-day mark. So that morning the blood was nida, but that night the blood will be zava.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you engage with her that night and cause her to have blood, then you will have turned her nida into a zava,
Right.
and now you run into a bigger problem.
Right.
Is there any, it's not topic, but is there any
Sources that can give you background?
repercussions of man engaging with zava?
That's the word.
That's the biblical prohibition.
Yeah.
Right? You're not allowed to engage with nida or zava, but there are different laws for the purity from nida or from zava.
When she wasn't a zava, this triggered a zava.
Correct. And now you can't be with her tomorrow.
But during that,
You're saying that night.
during that
Actually,
intimacy,
yes,
if you did go ahead and she became a zava,
what do you do?
Midway through.
There's no repercussions.
Okay, so the halacha, there actually is. The halacha is, this actually applies today. If a man is with his wife and in middle their blood emerges,
as a zava.
Well, today we treat all blood as zava, but let's just say as a zava, or even as a nida, because you can't be with a nida either until she goes mikvah. So if there's blood right now, you can't be with her either way, right? So the halacha is actually you have to remain as you are until one goes limp, and then exit. Because exiting while one is still in a state of arousal is just as pleasurable as entering, and therefore the halacha is that the person's supposed to wait there until his limb calms down, and then he can exit. That's the halacha, which still applies till today. Yeah. Okay, but the bigger problem here is that if he makes her into a zava, now she just came back from mikvah, now he can't be with her the next day or the day after because he just made her into a zava. So it says Rabbi Shmuel, wait till the next day. But again, that doesn't apply to us today because anyway, no matter what kind of blood we see today, we wait 7 clean days anyway.
You would lose out on 7 clean days to trigger that.
Correct. Well, it's more complicated than that, but yes. Okay, because again, we don't have the laws of Zav anymore, but the laws of Zav are more complicated. Was it 1 day in a row? Was it 3 days? You have to wait. It's all complicated. Okay, so Rambam's version of Nida and Zava is different than the halacha actually, because he has a different way of calculating how you split the time between Nida and Zava, which most halakha authorities reject. And I don't know if it's available in English, but in the Alter Rebbe's Laws of Nida, he writes an introduction to the Laws of Nida in Hebrew, in which he goes to the background of how we got from the biblical Nida Zava to the contemporary. And he goes through, okay, what's the biblical Nida? What's the biblical Zava? What are the different opinions on that? Why did they take it upon themselves to be more stringent? And what are the repercussions of that? So it gives you like a real halachic history of how we got from Nida today. And then he launches into the halachas of Nida.
Like what Steinsaltz would do.
It sounds like a Steinsaltz type thing. That's right. That's very good. Okay, so I don't know
that was a smart move, because in those days, when they allowed her to go in, it usually was in a river or a big pool or a pond. And then when they started closing it up and making a mikvah, then it got to be a problem.
Because
so they changed it.
Well, it
because
could be.
The mikvah can become the Red Sea.
Yeah, maybe. Because I hear you. The Red Sea is not called the Red Sea because it's red. We'll call it. We'll go with the
Sea of reeds.
No. There is the Red Sea. The in Salt Lake City. In Salt Lake City, you have the Red Lakes, the red Salt Lakes in Salt Lake and Utah, right outside of Salt Lake City. That's what's called Salt Lake City, right? You have the Salt Lakes, and they turn red. Anyway, that could be part of it. But if I remember correctly, the reason why the women became more stringent is because it's very difficult to keep track of the calendar. No, is today another Nida? Today is Zava time. And then Zava itself is more complicated because if it was a 1 day Zava, you have to wait a day. If it turns 2 days, you have to wait 2 days. And if it's a 3 days, and after Zava, you got to bring a carbon, and it gets so difficult to keep track that it's much more simplified just to say, okay, we'll treat all blood Zava, we wait 7 days, and that's the end of it. Especially since there's no more carbon to be worried about.
Right. Take the strictest scenario and run with it.
Exactly. So when you have carbon, then you can't take the strictest scenario because you can't bring a carbon after a Nida. But once you have no more carbon anyway, just treat it all as Zava and you wait 7 days, it simplifies it. That's probably the reason. But maybe what you're saying is also part of it. You have to see when did mikvah start and does it match up with the timeline of when women became more strict. Okay. So these are the advice that Rabbi Shmuel gives to Rabbi. Now the Gemara continues. Shloisha Dvarim, there are 3 things, Tziva, that were commanded Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, that Rabbi Yossi, son of Yehuda, gave to Rabbi, Rabbi. Okay, so first Rabbi Shmuel gave his instruction to Rabbi, and now Rabbi Yossi is giving his instruction to Rabbi.
Wait, so this Rabbi Yehuda is not the same Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi?
No, this Rabbi Yehuda would be Rabbi Yossi's father. And this is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is Ben Gamliel.
So when the Mishnah quotes...
Question
Sorry.
4. Is there's also like a male nomenclature for, so it's like a ziv and a ziva or something?
Correct. Male also have zova. Zova,
Right.
zova.
So,
It's also an emission from that organ, but it's Rambam describes as consistency. It's not semen, nor is it
Okay.
urine.
Right.
pus-like.
It's some sort of
And
pus-like.
it
It's a
may be
it's a
even-
pus-like
Right.
dribble
I've even
Right.
heard it being equated with a disease
of
sexually transmitted.
no, it's called
disease,
there's a
gonorrhea.
gonorrhea specifically
okay.
produces a kind of pus. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
I've seen that also. Yes, I've heard this.
But
And then is there distancing halachas regarding
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so 3 things that were commanded by Rabbi Yossi to Rabbi, right? So we had Rabbi Shmuel to Rabbi, now we have Rabbi Yossi. 3 things. Number 1, and these things you should, or at least some of them you should remember from the Alta Shulchan Aruch. Namely, number 1, al teitzi yechidi balayla. A person should not walk the streets alone at nighttime for fear of the demons,
Yeah.
specifically Wednesday night and Friday night,
Kesef Miriri.
which we will get to Ketef Miriri, which we will get to about the Wednesday and the Friday night and how that happened.
We didn't learn about the days, right? We just learned that.
I believe we did. Specifically Wednesday and Friday.
Learned about not walking on the side or
The alleyways, yeah.
middle.
Right. So this was in the Alter Shulchan Aruch, right? Not to walk out at night alone for fear of the demons. And the Gemara will get to the story of how we ended up with Friday night and Wednesday night being the bigger problem. We'll get to that. Sorry?
I think
We did. The Gemara will soon get to that story. That's advice number 1. Or command. I should call it advice because the Gemara says tziva, commanded. This was instruction number 1 from Rabbi Yossi to Rabbi. Number 2, al tamei b'fnei haner arum. Don't stand in front of a candle whilst naked, while undressed. We also had that.
Right. Had that one too.
We had that also not to stand in front of a candle undressed. Number 3, al tikones lemerchatz chadosh. Do not go into a new bathhouse, shower house. Why is that? Because Shema Tiftach, maybe it's brand new. You don't know if it can handle all the traffic, and maybe it'll open up and fall in.
Huh.
So what he's saying here is like this: the bathhouses in the old day, right? They were like built on stilts. Oh, here you have it. They were built on stilts, and under it they had heated floors.
Oh, wow.
And so some parts of it were heated under, and some parts of it had water. It's correct, very sophisticated system to keep the water hot, keep the floors hot because you're walking around barefoot and you just got wet, so heated floors, and they had like running drainage because you were soaking wet, and so basically the whole building was built on stilts with either water or fire under you, and therefore, if God forbid,
collapses, you
collapse
to fire
or water.
Alternative.
Alternative.
Exactly what you said is a commentary here.
Rashi and Rashbam seem to imply that water is the big problem, that the bottom, that under it is like wells of water. But I would assume fire is also a thing, even though Rashi and Rashbam don't mention it for whatever reason. What did he say there? Read it.
The bathhouses of the Tanakh and Talmudic times were heated by fire lit beneath their floors.
Okay.
The heat was transferred to the entire structure by means of special pipes. Sometimes.
Okay, so the pipes are filled with water.
Right.
So it was like water heated.
Right.
Okay, there you go.
Very sophisticated. Sometimes heat and humidity would cause the foundations of the bathhouse to collapse.
It's all wood.
Endangering everyone inside.
It was all wood, so it would corrode. Yeah.
Pipes, boiler, and bath. They had a boiler system.
Oh, yeah. You can visit.
Boiler and then went through the pipes.
Yeah, in Rome, you can go visit such old bathhouses, and even in Jerusalem, in Israel, there are places you can go see them. Very, very sophisticated. Yeah. It's to go into the bathhouse was like going to what do they call Nordic spa?
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like that. So it was a whole event, it was a whole experience.
Right.
So if it's a new one, you don't know if it's strong enough to hold all the traffic. Sorry, yeah. So if it's a new one, you don't know if it can hold all the traffic, and it's dangerous. So don't go into a new one. Yeah. So ad kama.
Please.
So the Gemara now.
After you.
Yeah. So the Gemara now interjects with commentary. Now here, since you're talking about the timeline, here I know that it's no longer Rabbi Yossi speaking, because even though it's not Aramaic, because the person who follows is Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi speaking, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is a student of Rabbi. Right, so it's Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi instructed Rabbi, and now his student Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi explaining. Now Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is speaking in Hebrew because he, like Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chia, and that generation were the generation that were slowly moving from Israel to Babylonia. So that the transition between the Tanaic and the Amoraic. Okay, so ad kama, until what point do we consider it new? Like at what point can you start going? Amar Rabbi Shubin Levi says, ad yud beis chodesh, up to 12 months. So wait a year, and if the bathhouse still stands, go and enjoy. If everybody took this advice, then bathhouses would be empty for a full year.
And then after a year, it'd still be brand new.
Except for those brave souls that went in there.
Yeah.
As rogue.
So this is the only
Let the guy go first.
Sorry?
Let the guy go first.
Let the guy go first. So this is the only three that doesn't make it to halacha, which actually makes sense, because this is only relevant in such times when you have such bathhouses. The Alter Rebbe is writing in Shulchan Aruch when there are no such bathhouses. And I don't think the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Cairo was also written at a time when they had such bathhouses. Much later too. This would have been only in Roman times, like Roman era, yeah. So there you have it. But the previous ones also weren't mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, the Nida one is not in the Shulchan Aruch because we don't do that today. Actually, no, the idea of not standing over. Okay, I don't know, leave that alone. Okay, so now the Gemara analyzes the statement of not standing in front of a candle while one is undressed. And we actually had this in the Shulchan Aruch, and the Gemara is going to add one more detail, which is not in the Shulchan Aruch that we learned, but in the Shulchan Aruch elsewhere. Namely, Al Tamud Bifnei Haner Arum. Rabbi Yossi told Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi, don't stand in front of a candle whilst naked, whilst undressed. Titania, for we learned in another Mishnah text which reads, Ha'im Bifnei Haner Arum, one who stands in front of a candle while undressed, Have Nichbe, causes seizures, causes him to be prone to seizures. Becomes epileptic.
I think we learned that.
Yes, we learned that epileptic. Epilepsy has seizures, right?
Yeah.
So we learned that in the Shulchan Aruch. It said that not to stand in front of a candle while undressed because it causes epilepsy. And the Gemara adds something here which it is in the Shulchan Aruch, but not in the chapter that we learned. Because the chapter we learned is about safety of the self, which would include not to stand in front of a candle while undressed. The next statement is about intimacy, and it's in the laws of intimacy, not in the laws not in the laws of personal safety.
Yeah.
But actually, the laws that this is not in the classic laws of nida, because the laws of intimacy are in two different places. One is the laws of nida, when a person may or may not be engaged in intimacy, and the other is the laws of tznius, the laws of modesty. And there too, it discusses the modesty of intimacy, which is not when and when you shouldn't, but how. Namely, and if the Gemara says like this, listen to these words. There's other Gemara elsewhere which is much more elaborate on this topic. Hameshamesh metasai, one who engages in intimacy, la'or haner, in presence of a candle, havelun, haveloi, banim nichbin, causes his children produced from that intimacy to be epileptic.
Nice.
Oish. And this is something that the Shulchan Aruch talks about, and the Gemara elsewhere talks about, that the way in which a person engages at the moment of conception has an effect on the children that are born.
Okay.
Not only that, especially in Kabbalah, it speaks about the thoughts a person has during the moment of conception has its effect on the children's neshama. We've mentioned in the Tanya, we've mentioned this in chapter 1.
Yeah.
Right? The way in which the sanctity that the parents bring into their intimacy has effect on the way the child is born. And this is something reflected in the Shulchan Aruch as well. It gets quite detailed actually in terms of position and other such activity and the effect on the children. So I mentioned,
To set up the mood with a candle isn't like the Hamidic, It's
so you can put the Shulchan Aruch says that you put like a mechitza between you and the candle.
okay.
So in other words, if it's not, it's on the floor,
Okay.
so you're not directly in front of the.
Right.
But yeah, this is Gemara says this.
And is that
Also, if you're covered, if you're under covers, it's different. Battery candles. So, sorry.
is that like extrapolated or that's mamish?
It's mamish in there in the halacha.
Wow.
But I should say like this. I mentioned this before. It's important to understand this. What was I going to say? Oh, in fact, before I was going to get to that, before it actually, in fact, it says that on Yom Kippur, a person should have a candle in his room so that it prevents him from being intimate because he knows he's not supposed to do it with a candle. Yeah.
Huh.
But
Okay.
is this in modern times?
The same thing
Same
true of a
here.
light.
Of
Okay, so-
candle, of battery, light.
Okay, so light is another issue, which is a tznius issue, a modesty issue
Of course.
about lights, versus this is not really a modesty issue
No, it's
so much of like a spiritual thing
Yeah.
being in front of a candle.
danger.
So that's I think this halacha applies specifically to a candle, but the modesty issue would be true even for electric lights.
Artificial light.
Yeah,
Well,
Okay,
but
so-
it's hard in pitch black.
doesn't be pitch black necessarily, but it's not bright light.
Right, exactly.
So just to explain a little bit, the halacha here had
No, nothing. I just.
yeah, the halacha has two extremes on this regard. I think I mentioned this before, but it's important. I'll repeat it. The halacha has two extremes on this subject. One thing the halacha says is call masha adam lasis be'ishtay oisa. Whatever a person wants to do with his wife, he may do, so long as she consents.
Hmm.
That's the halacha. So long as she consents, and so long as there's no wasted seed, whatever that means, we'll leave it alone for now. Which basically means he finishes while inside. That's the point. Whatever he wants to do, he can do. This is one halacha. On the other hand, the halacha has all these rules like under the blankets, only at nighttime, only face to face, only without the lights and all the other stuff that talks about in terms of modesty. So which one is it? To do whatever I want or
Yeah.
So I think the correct attitude is as follows. We have this principle that Yarda Chacham L'Sof Da'ata Shel Adam, that the sages go down to the end of man's thinking. In other words, the sages, as we know from learning Gemara, are very honest about human nature. Right? Nothing's off the table for Gemara. Gemara talks about everything. And not just assume this holy roller attitude and say, oh well, that's not in our Torah or holy world. No, the Gemara, the sages discuss everything. And they understand human nature all the way to the end. Right? On the one hand.
All the way under the bed. The story in the Gemara. One of the students of a sage.
Because Rabbi was
hid under the sage's bed to see.
Because he wanted to learn how to do it like a bench.
Oh.
Imagine. And Rabbi throws nuts. What are you doing here, Mishuganet? And the student says, it's Torah, I want to know. Anyway. So that story is very instructive, actually. But
No,
I want to leave the story alone for now. Not that anybody should be hiding in anybody else's bed, but it's destructive in different ways. Whatever, leave it alone for now. Yeah, no, because anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
Because the Gemara describes that the sage himself was communicating with his wife, speaking such language that would put each other in the mood, if you will.
Right.
And the student was surprised. Right.
Right.
In other words, it plays into what I'm about to tell you, which is on the one hand, the Chachamim went to the end of human thinking, worst possible thoughts, and understood it. That's number one. And considering that, the Gemara says, look, you're both consenting. You're adults. You're married. She went to mikveh, right? You're not, God forbid, forcing her to do anything she doesn't want to. Privacy of your own homes. Okay. You're human with urges. On the other hand, the Chachamim also look at you and say, okay, we also want to demonstrate to you, what does it look like for a Jew to engage in intimacy?
Right.
What's the standard you're striving for? What should you be striving for? And to use crass language, I'm sorry, but there's a difference between sex and intimacy. They're not the same thing.
Sure.
And the sages understand that you have urges. But what you're striving for is intimacy. And intimacy is created only in the sense of tznius. Right? And that's what the sages are enjoining us with the laws of tznius, giving us a standard by which we should be looking toward, because that's the true, holy, and sacred intimacy that we are striving for. Even though it also happens to be halachically true that, okay, you're a human being, you want to do something with your wife, and she always agrees, fine, whatever. On the same hand, the same Shulchan Aruch tells you, be careful with that activity, because if it produces a child, that's the kind of child you're producing. So do you want to produce a child from intimacy, or do you want to produce a child from the two of us exchanged pleasantries on and making sure our urges are filled? Where do you want your child to be born from? And what do you want your relationship to be built on?
It's kind of like what we were learning in Tanya about how you eat and if you're overindulging. Maybe you're bringing in that.
Exactly the same thing. You're bringing in non-Jewish Yetzer Haras. It's the same exact thing.
But this time it's
Correct.
transferring to the child.
correct.
The
So
offspring.
that's right. So
And he
that's-
got it
that's
from
right.
birth.
that's correct. That's correct. That's correct. The same activities can be holy or overindulgent.
No fault of the offspring.
That's right. Okay. Now, we'll learn tomorrow some more commentary on this specifically, and then continuing to more advice from the Gemara. We have a fascinating story tomorrow
Oh,
about how the demons ended up on Wednesday and Friday night specifically.
great.
Very fascinating
forward.
stories. Okay, looking forward. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Yeah.
I thought the angels were with us on Friday night.
Okay, we're gonna get to that, God willing. But since you mentioned that, we're gonna bring it up tomorrow. Even though it's not directly related, even though the Gemara doesn't bring it up, we will, and we'll talk about what that means. Okay, have a good day and